Picture this. While America was busy building walls and imposing tariffs, China just opened its entire market to 53 African countries. Zero tariffs, zero barriers. But here is the kicker. Just months ago, before this massive trade gift, China gave visa-free entry to 38 countries around the world. Guess how many were African? Zero. What's really happening here? Is this the end of US influence in Africa, or is there something far more calculated? Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will change how you think about global power forever. But before we dive into China's chess moves, let me ask you something. Remember when Kenya's farmers started calling avocados green gold?
This is gold. Avocado.
In 2024, Kenya exported $159 million worth of avocados. That's an 11% jump from the year before. But here's where it gets interesting. China just became one of their biggest new markets, earning Kenya over $1 billion from Chinese buyers alone. Now, Joyce Camo, a smallholder farmer with less than 1 acre of land, made millions just from selling avocado in 2 years. Rural millionaires are being created as we speak. But is this prosperity, or is this the setup for something much more bigger? Here's what nobody's talking about. While Kenya's farmers are celebrating, and while China is removing all tariffs for 54 African countries, the United States just did the exact opposite. Trump's Liberation Day, tariffs hit Africa like a sledgehammer. Lesotho 50% tariffs, Madagascar 47%, South Africa 31%. Some of the poorest countries in the world suddenly faced some of the hardest trade barriers in modern history. When one superpower builds walls and the other opens doors, who do you think wins African hearts? For 25 years, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, was America's main trade lifeline to Africa. Duty-free access to thousands of products, it was supposed to help Africa develop. But here is the harsh reality. US-Africa trade peaked in 2008 at $86 billion. By 2024, it had crashed to just $29 billion. Meanwhile, China-Africa trade hit $300 billion, more than 10 times what America manages, and now AGOA is expiring in September 2025. Most experts say AGOA is dead for the long term, says Manchester Trade President Stefan Landy. But China just announced zero tariffs for all 53 African nations that have diplomatic ties with Beijing. Not South Africa, none. Think about it. If China really wants to deepen people-to-people interaction with Africa, why make it easier for Germans or Italians to visit China and not Africans? Here's what I think is happening, and let me know in the comment section if you agree. China isn't interested in African tourism or cultural exchange. China wants African resources and African markets. The visa exclusion isn't an oversight, it's a strategy. And here's the uncomfortable truth. While Europe rejects 30% of African visa applications, that's 1 in 3 Africans denied entry into Europe. China actually has much lower rejection rates for Africans who do apply. So my second question, is China's trade generosity actually respect for Africa, or is it just some more sophisticated form of control? Now here is where mainstream media gets it wrong. Everyone is celebrating China's zero-tariff deal as this amazing gift to Africa. But let me share with you what skeptics are saying. Some analysts argue that China's trade offer might actually help Chinese businesses more than African ones. Why? Because removing tariffs makes it easier for China to buy raw materials from Africa: bauxite, copper, lead, tin, diamond, gold. But what about African manufactured goods? What about African technology? What about African brands competing in Chinese markets? Now, pay attention. Here is the pattern that worries me. China buys cheaper raw materials. Africa becomes more dependent on commodity exports. China processes these materials into finished goods and sells them back to African markets at higher prices. Extract raw materials at value elsewhere and sell them back at more higher prices. Sounds familiar? It's the same playbook Europe used during colonization. But here is why I am optimistic about Africa's future, and this brings us back to those Kenyan avocado farmers. You see, Kenya isn't just selling raw avocados to China. They are building processing facilities. They are creating avocado oil, guacamole, and other value-added products. Joyce Kamu didn't just sell raw fruit. She built a supply chain, trained other farmers, and created a cooperative that negotiated better prices. This is key. You see, Africa must use this moment strategically. Take China's open market. Yes, but don't sell just raw materials. Add value, process, make brands, create jobs. And here is something very, very powerful. China's zero-tariff policy covers all products, not just raw materials. That means processed goods, manufactured items, and tech products from Africa can now enter China duty-free. The opportunity is massive, but only if Africa seizes it smartly. Which brings me to what I think will happen in the next 6 months. And this is critical for understanding where Africa is heading. First, more African countries will announce major export deals with China. I predict we will see at least 5 new bilateral agreements before the end of 2025. Second, I believe the US will try to counter-offer. They can't let China dominate Africa completely. Watch for emergency AGOA extensions or new trade initiative from Washington. But here is the big one, and this is very, very interesting. I think China will start asking something in return for the zero tariffs. Maybe political support at the UN, maybe exclusive mining rights, maybe something else entirely. Because here is something everyone forgets. China doesn't give gifts. China makes investments, and every investment expects a return. So my third question for you is, what do you think China would ask for in return? Drop your prediction in the comments below. Look, here is the bottom line. We are witnessing the biggest shift in global power since the end of the Cold War. America's America First approach is pushing African countries into China's embrace, and China is welcoming them with open arms and open markets. But this isn't about trade numbers or geopolitical chess games. This is about real people. It's about Joyce Kamoe making enough money to send her kids to university. It's about thousands of Kenyan farmers transitioning from subsistence to prosperity, or whether we are just trading from one dependency to another. The question isn't whether China's influence is growing. It obviously is. The question is whether Africa can leverage this moment to build genuine economic power. And that's entirely up to African leaders, African businesses, and African people themselves. So here's what I want you to do. In the comments below, tell me, what do you think would happen next? Will Africa become China's next resource basket? Or will this be the moment Africa finally breaks free from economic dependency altogether? I want specific predictions. Which country signs the biggest deal with China next? Will the US manage to counter China's move, and how? In the next 6 months, will we see new African millionaires or new forms of African dependency? And most importantly, if you were an African leader right now, what will you demand from China in exchange for your country's resources? What conditions would you set? Because that conversation, that negotiation, that's what is happening in boardrooms, in government offices across Africa right now. And that will determine Africa's future for the next 50 years. Hit that subscribe button if you want to keep tracking the story as it unfolds. Share this video with someone who needs to know what's happening in global trade. And remember, the world is changing fast. The question isn't whether you will be affected by these changes. The question is whether you will be prepared for them. This is the Strategic Lens. I am Asongwa Luis. See you in my next investigation. Bye.